Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of DailyDead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James, and I'm joined today by Tamika Jones, Derek Anderson, and Bryan Christopher. Today's episode is dedicated to Dr. Sleep. We're going to be talking everything Dr. Sleep, including spoilers, so this is a big spoiler warning. If you haven't seen it, go see it, and then listen to the episode. So we're going to dive into everything Dr. Sleep, but as I like to do, we're going to take it back a little bit earlier because you can't talk about Dr. Sleep without talking about The Shining. And I'm curious, and I think it's going to help with the discussion as well. For my co-hosts, I want to know about what was your first exposure to The Shining? Was it the book? Was it the movie? What do you think about him at the time? What do you think about him now? Let's start with Bryan. You can kick us off.
All right. My experience with The Shining starts and stops with the 1980 or 81, early 80s Kubrick film. I have not read the book. I have not seen the miniseries. So, it's just the movie for me. And I think from what I gather, there's kind of the two camps of people on this movie. There's the people who read the book first and then saw the movie and kind of hate it. I am in the other camp of people who didn't see or who didn't read the book first and really I enjoy the movie quite a bit.
Okay, and that was and The Shining did come out in 1980, so you had it right the first time.
Cool.
Ding ding.
Yep. Tamika, how about you?
When I was in middle school, I just tried to get my hands on any horror fiction that I could find in the library. So lucky for me, there was a lot of Stephen King books. So I read The Shining first. And then I remember taking an intro to film class in high school. And then I saw the Kubrick film. And I wasn't aware that there was a miniseries, so I'm not familiar with that at all.
So the miniseries was when they had, when Stephen King was a big part of, I think it was ABC, and when you'd have all those miniseries, you had like the Tommyknockers, and you had the Langoliers, and you had all those, and then Mick Garris redid The Shining, and it more closely follows the book, especially when it comes to the ending, and they filmed it at the Stanley Hotel, which is where Stephen King was staying, and he was inspired to write The Shining. So people feel differently about it. Clearly, it doesn't, stand up to the original, 1980 film in terms of popularity and cultural impact. But I think it's still worth a watch, especially if you enjoy the book. So I think a lot
of people maybe don't even realize that it exists because the shadow that is cast by Kubrick's The Shining and the source material by Stephen King. Like I didn't even realize, years ago I discovered the miniseries, but I didn't even know it existed. Like I'd never heard it mentioned, which is funny because like Mick Garris, he had done The Stand and has done many King adaptations over the years, but it just seems like it kind of got forgotten in a weird way. And so I think it is cool that it exists. And I know the whole mission behind that was kind of to do it the way that Stephen King wanted to do it. And, he wrote it just like he did the Stand miniseries. So I think it's kind of interesting that they were able to kind of make this alternate version of it, and that maybe Stephen King got some cathartic experience out of that, getting to do it kind of like the way he wanted to, and maybe casting someone for Jack Torrance that he thought didn't seem psychotic right off the bat, which I totally get that concern, but I think Jack Nicholson is so good in the movie that I don't even really, it doesn't bother me as much, but I definitely understand that. And I saw the movie before reading the book, and I think we just rented it from Blockbuster in the middle of winter. It's one of those movies that I think is really enhanced if you can watch it when there's like a foot or two of snow outside your window, which there is in February in Minnesota. So that was our experience watching it for the first time, like beginning to end, because I know like it would be on TV every once in a while, but really, really watching it for the first time, that was how we watched it with my family. And then ended up reading the book in the like 2010, somewhere around there, maybe 2009. And I was going to this gym, a gym called Bally's that has since closed. And it kind of been around. It was kind of the shining of gyms where there was like leaks in the roof, but it had this kind of old charm to it. And I remember reading a lot of the book on an elliptical of all things. And and strangely enough, I read The Stand on a stationary bike. So it's kind of funny, I guess, gym equipment and Stephen King books.
All at once?
No, I should clarify. Yeah, it was more like I read a good chunk of it, but no, not all at once and not beginning to end on that bike, or I might have died. But
even if you did split up, it's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to work different muscle groups. But I do find a lot to enjoy from the book, and I didn't even realize really that there was a controversy with how King perceived the adaptation until I kind of started reading the book and like looked on Wikipedia and that kind of thing. Cause the movie had been out for like 30 years at this point. So there wasn't really any renewed discussion about the book movie controversy, but I could totally see like how some major plot differences were made between the book and the movie. And I actually really like the book. And I think it might even be the creepier experience, just from some of the descriptions and the ending and what happens with certain characters. But I think it kind of they can each exist, like, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you have different choices, and you can love all of them or none of them. For me, I've talked about this before. In grade school, I read any Stephen King book I could get my hand on, whether it was going to the library or borrowing it from my teachers, who also were really into Stephen King at the time. And I didn't start with The Shining, but it was one of the first 4 or 5 books I read. And I mean, obviously Stephen King in general, but The Shining too. I mean, it was a game changer for me, and really kind of opened me up to horror. And I read it before I ever had seen the movie. When it came to watching the movie, it was at my parents' place, a annual like Halloween tradition. I think almost every Halloween for years, we'd make sure we ended on The Shining.
Oh, wow.
And I think as I've gotten older, it's a movie that continues to stay with me and I continue to think about, because I think it was one of the first movies I saw where I really kind of was like, there's more to this, or that where I could really observe the filmmaking aspect. Like, this movie doesn't sound like other movies. It doesn't look like other movies. It has a hypnotic quality, and why? And then, kind of got me, digging more into the filmmaking process and being like, well, who directed this? And Stanley Kubrick. What else did he make? And so, there were other movies too that kind of kicked that off, but this was definitely a big one for me. And then we talked a little bit about the mini series. I mean, if you were alive when the Stephen King mini series, when they were coming on TV, I mean, they were big events. I mean, obviously we didn't have, the internet, and so everybody would just get together, and it would be, usually over 2 nights, like a Sunday or Monday. With The Stand, it was a little bit more, but like these were big, like cultural events. Like everybody sat in front of the TV, and I was with my parents and brother and sister, and we'd watch, and we'd watch the latest miniseries. And with knowing the limitations of TV, we always knew we probably weren't going to get the best thing ever, but we always had a good time with that. So I have good memories of that. So I think now's a good time to kind of jump into Dr. Sleep. Oh, well, actually, I'm going to stop for a minute, because we were going to have Scott on here. And unfortunately, Scott got sick. And Scott, I hope you feel much better. Hopefully, by the time we release this episode, you're completely healed. And we may have to
and hopefully we don't make you sick again.
Yes. We may have to do a bonus episode or something, because I'm really curious. Now, with Scott, he is not a huge fan of The Shining, as long-term Corpse Club listeners know. But over time, I kind of understand it from his point of view. He loves Burnt Offerings. It's like his favorite movie of all time. And if you saw that movie and then you watch The Shining later, you're like, well, it's kind of the same thing, but, you know, in his opinion, not as good. And while I disagree, I am curious to see what he has to say about this. So anyway, let's talk about Dr. Sleep. It was, first of all, has anyone read the book? I know, Derek, you just started, but Tamika or Bryan, have you read it?
Yeah.
I have not, no.
Okay, so
No,
I'm 100 pages in, so I can advise on like the first 30 minutes of the movie.
it's all good though.
Came prepared for this one.
Yeah, so I mean, the book came out in 2013, and this was kind of a big surprise for everybody because no one thought he was going to sequelize it. Even when he did, it was, you know, originally before people had heard the synopsis or read the book, I was like, well, do we really need one? Like, obviously, you know, sequels rarely live up to the original. And in this case, he went in a completely different way and, you know, has us follow Dan Torrance. And it's less of a sequel to The Shining and more of an adventure with Dan, 40 years later. And I think it was very well received at the time it came out. Even if it wasn't, I liked it. And so when I heard that they were going to make a movie out of it, it was interesting because it's like, well, where do you go with it? Do you adapt it exactly? How do you tie it back? And then, you know, some of the same questions that people had online were some of the same questions that Mike Flanagan had when he was looking at creating this movie. How do you make a movie that was written by Stephen King, related to events that happened in his book, while for the general population, their familiarity with The Shining starts and stops with the Stanley Kubrick film. And so his solution to it, as we know, was to kind of merge the two. And so this is the book, an adaptation of the book, but it ties in as a sequel to the movie, which I think was a great way to kind of bridge those two. And personally, and I'll kick this off, I thought that he did an excellent job. I thought it was an incredibly difficult challenge to be able to kind of merge those worlds. And also to live up to the Kubrick adaptation. There are obviously going to be comparisons. Some people may have tried to just make it exactly the same, and I find that Mike Flanagan made something that was all his own, while equally interesting and hypnotic in different ways. And we can talk about that more later. So I quite enjoyed it. I'm going to see what you guys thought, because I don't know what everybody thought. Derek, as you happen to do sometimes, you will see the movie right before we're going to record. So in this case, how long ago did you see the movie?
I just finished watching it about 2 hours prior to this recording.
So this movie is fresh. This is almost as fresh as it could be, besides recording in the theater right after the credits roll.
That would be cool.
And very briefly, like I said, we'll dive into the individual elements, but what did you think of the movie? Did you like it?
I loved it. I really, like you mentioned, I think Flanagan nailed it, and what a daunting task that is to try and please both camps and sequelize two different versions of the same story. But I think he really nailed it, and I think he brought his Haunting of Hill House sensibilities into this project really well, and that same foreboding atmosphere I thought was there. I think the characters, like any King story, kind of lives and dies by its characters, and the same goes for movie adaptations of his work. And I think the characters were absolutely phenomenal and were really brought to life by everyone, very exemplary. So I think they really nailed it across the board. So I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Okay. And Tamika, how about you? What do you think of the movie?
Okay.
Ooh, it's a sigh.
No. No. I think that the movie is beautiful. I think that I agree with Derek that Stephen King characters are so beautiful and rich and so interesting. And so this film captures all of that. It captures, I don't know why I'm trying to like walk around things. I'm not even going to say anything that bad.
No, you don't have to. Yeah, we want honest opinions here, and you can spoil anything you want. So don't worry about walking around.
I don't even know why I'm teetering, but so I'm not even going to say anything crazy. But I think that's where my enjoyment kind of ends for this film. I think it's obviously well made. It is beautifully shot. Again, the acting is wonderful, especially from Ewan McGregor. You know, the writing, it's not the writing or the direction or anything like that. I found the film boring. I think that's why I was teetering, because I didn't want to use that word in particular, but I did, if I'm honest. I found it to be a little boring.
Only honest opinions here. Okay, we'll dive into it. We'll dive into it.
Okay.
First,
I'm starting to sweat.
It's okay.
The sides have been said. What side are you on, Bryan? No pressure.
I haven't seen it yet. Is that going to be a problem for this discussion? Or
oh no, Bryan.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
But you have read the Wikipedia page, so we're good.
Yes, and based off of that, I hated it. No, this is my favorite movie of the year so far, and we're pretty close to the end of the year, so I'm pretty confident this is going to wind up being my favorite horror movie of 2019.
Oh wow.
And it actually really surprised me because it wasn't even really a movie that was on my radar as something I wanted to see until about a week beforehand. And just like I was bored and watched the trailer. And for some reason, when that Shining theme music hits at the end of the trailer, I'm like, I think I really need to see this movie. And so it was one of those ones where like I went out on a Friday night by myself. Most of the people in my circle do not want to watch horror movies. So this was kind of like just like a little treat to myself to go out and just take a chance on this because I figured I was going to really like it. And as it turns out, I absolutely loved it. It took the premise of The Shining and kind of expanded that universe while not over explaining it for my taste. It made the first one even a little bit better for me. And it makes me want to go back and read the Shining novel as well as Dr. Sleep. So like, I think it accomplished everything that Mike Flanagan would want to accomplish for this particular audience. So yes, I absolutely love this movie.
No, that's great to hear. So we have a spread almost all over the place. I mean, we don't have a full I hate it. We have a boring. We do need an I hate it to have a full spread, but it's okay. We'll work with what we got.
And I heard a couple of I was a little worried going into it because the week of it was a little divided. Like there were plenty of people who, like Tamika, you definitely have people who are on your side and that it really didn't work for them. And they thought it was way too long. I mean, it was like, 2 hours and 44 minutes, but I never found any of that dragging for me. And I kind of wish Scott was here because he would agree with me. Like we're both very much in the camp of do not make a movie longer than it needs to be because we will check right out. But that for whatever reason, at just under 3 hours, I was never bored and I was never looking at my watch, waiting for this movie to end.
Yeah. I mean, I would say in fact, I could have watched more. It definitely felt like, and Derek, you had mentioned about the Haunting of Hill House. It seems like, Mike Flanagan, with that long form storytelling, like he had this longer story. We kind of got the highlights, but there's so much there that you feel like they could dive into with the True Knot that like we're only scratching the surface there. I think that I think the amount of time they gave us works. I could have even used it a little bit more. But I do want to make sure because like I said, three of us really like it. Tamika, I know you said it was a little boring, and I want to hear about it because, again, different people, I've heard different opinions from different people. I want to talk about some of those, but yours in particular. What about the movie dragged for you, and why did it drag? Why did this not work for you or play the same way?
I really wish that I had the time to read the novel because I really wanted to do that. And then it just time got away from me, and I just couldn't to see, if I could compare the two. But what I found to be the most, I don't want to say unnecessary because I don't fully know that, but the True Knot storyline felt like its own movie, and it wasn't really something that was compelling to me, and I didn't really care to see what they were doing. So since there's so much focus on them, I'm assuming there's some type of cult that it really dragged. I wish that I had been able to somehow find a way to be invested in that storyline or invested in. Can we talk about like specific characters and stuff like that?
You can talk about whatever you want.
Okay. So they're travelers, and Rose, the Hat, I believe her name is, Rebecca Ferguson. Again, I loved her acting. Rebecca Ferguson, I can't really think of too many things that she's been in that I didn't enjoy. But I wasn't taken in by her or that storyline at all. And there's so much focus on them that I just thought, okay, when is this going to circle back to Danny? Because that's where my interest lies. So when are we going to get back there? And I think asking myself that all the time just kept taking me, the more I kept doing it, it just kept taking me mentally out of what was happening. And they're also, and I don't ask for likable characters because there are a lot of anti-heroes, protagonists, antagonists that I really enjoy, who don't always have the best personalities. But here, they're just so despicable to me. And again, I'm sure that's on purpose and that's completely fine. But they were just so despicable. I just thought, oh, God, we're still here. Oh, we're still here. Oh, we're killing. Spoiler.
No, we already gave a spoiler warning. You say whatever you want.
Okay. Oh, we're killing children. Oh, we're still here. It's like, I can't with this anymore. And again, I'm fine with that sounds terrible. I'm not fine with child murder.
I think you said we can edit it so that it sounds like you still said it.
I do want to jump in.
Not here. Okay with that.
I do want to jump in
not
here
okay.
briefly.
Sure,
because
yeah.
I thought that was an important scene for me because up until that point, they kind of present this group as like, they're the villains, they're doing bad things, but they do have this kind of like sympathetic family vibe to them. And you kind of know there's something sinister lurking in the background. And for me, this is where, when they pick up poor Jacob Tremblay and just torture this poor kid to death so that they can feed off of him, that's where the movie takes the turn. And you really see kind of this group as the evil that they are. And I think that's kind of where the movie really picks up for me because it's kind of been setting up its pieces the rest of the time, kind of showing them separately. So you get Danny and his arc with the drug abuse and kind of overcoming that and becoming a hospice worker. You have Abra growing up and kind of having these very weird powers that nobody can understand, but she's also a great kid and she starts growing up. And then you have this what is it again? The True Knot that they're called. I keep forgetting that name.
I believe so.
That's it.
Yeah, but you see them, as they're kind of bumping up their numbers a little bit, but you also, they're sinister, but they're kind of charming, like especially Crow Daddy. I think Zahn McClarnon, I hope he gets more and more roles as time goes on, because I love him in anything he's in. He seems to have smaller parts, but in here he gets a little bit more to chew on, and I really like his presence. So so that scene with the poor baseball kid is really harrowing, and it's tough to watch, but it's also kind of really the catalyst for what kicks off the rest of the movie.
I think it's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's one of the most uncomfortable parts of the movie. It's certainly, I think it's the only part of the movie where this really kind of goes for that R rating. Otherwise, by modern standards, the movie's pretty tame.
I don't know, that partial degloving a little later is pretty gnarly too.
I'm sorry. For us, for us who have watched 1,000+ horror movies, it was pretty tame. I forgot the degloving was just like, I love the degloving in Gerald's Game. So I'm just like, I could take a little more degloving in my life. Is that where I'm going with this? Okay, that's where we're going with this.
It's one of those themes in Flanagan projects, right?
Yeah.
Someone's got to lose some hand skin, otherwise it's not a Flanagan.
Yeah.
It's true.
But Tamika, you mentioned, and I think it's a good point, that if you're not invested, and maybe that is the difference between people who watch the movie, right? Or at least one difference. If you're invested in Dan or Danny's storyline, I don't think it's the most interesting one. But if you don't like the True Knot story, like it's just a lot of like, well, when are we going to get back to these shining elements or these characters that I like? I do think, for me, for the most part, Rebecca Ferguson and Kyliegh Curran, they outshine Ewan McGregor, and I love Ewan McGregor; he's a great actor. But I feel like Rose the Hat and Abra as characters, for me, are more interesting, and they're the ones I want to follow. I feel like I said, I think we have a spread of people who like the movie to different degrees, and so for me, I would say that my criticism of this, or the part that kind of took me out, was when we do go back to Dan Torrance, almost the reverse of what you had, Tamika. I think even though I like where they go in the ending and how it all kind of ties back to the original Shining novel, I think the movie's stronger when it doesn't lean into tying back to Kubrick or to the original book, I should say.
I will admit that I think, and again, I think I'm in kind of a particular position for like this to be a movie for me, in that part of why I was so invested in Danny's story is that drug abuse is something that kind of runs in my family quite a bit. I've been lucky enough to avoid that myself, but I will say I spent a lot of time growing up going to AA meetings. And so that whole story was something like, usually if you include that kind of an element and you do it well, you're going to draw me in. So, I think that I can definitely see, like, if that kind of a story doesn't hold any interest to you, again, going back to the idea that it's 2 hours and 44 minutes long. So it means that Flanagan is taking, I think, a lot of time with all three of these elements, the True Knot, with Abra, with Danny. And if you don't like any one of those elements, odds are you're going to be spending enough time with them that you are going to get bored and you really might not like this movie.
The AA meeting, too, is another kind of Flanagan theme, because that was a huge part of the storyline with The Haunting of Hill House, with the brother going to the meetings. And I think it is really done really well here. It gives us that backstory into like what life has been like for Danny since the Overlook Hotel. And I know it's also, at least that's the part of the book that I've read, so I can say that they do a good job of bringing that onto screen. But like you mentioned, Tamika, I think the True Knot, to me, is like probably the most hateable group of characters that I've seen for me personally, I just hate them so much watching them in this movie. But it's kind of one of those things where I think I really, that's what kind of draws me in, because they're really, at first I kind of saw them, like you mentioned, Brian, as this almost like charming group of RV travelers. They're like a rambling kind of group of people that's traversing the country and living off the land. And I almost saw it as like a Lost Boys group, especially when Rose the Hat gives this proposition to Snakebite Andy, where she says, live long, eat well. And it really seemed to be similar to David trying to get Michael to become a vampire in the Lost Boys, and the fashion kind of like hinted at the Lost Boys just a little bit. So I had this really kind of like, a fun 80s Lost Boys vibe with this group. And then the hardest scene I've ever watched in a theater, at least in this decade, happens with Jacob Tremblay's character. And that scene is probably the most uncomfortable I've been in a theater in the 2010s. And I think it speaks to the power of that scene. And I do think it is, in a strange way, kind of necessary to the story, because it makes me hate these characters. Because at that point I see, not only are they killing people to live, but they take a sickening pleasure in it, and they are enjoying themselves. It is more pleasure than necessity for them, or at least equivalent to that. And I think it really, really made me despise these characters, as charming as they could be. It's the most I've rooted against a group of characters in a movie in a very long time, to the point where we get to the ambush at the state park, and I am literally like pumping my fists when the shootout is happening and they're finally getting some comeuppance. And I'm like audibly swearing, because when things don't go according to plan. And it's like the most invested I've been in a showdown, like with these characters, because I just really want them to get what they deserve after seeing what they've been doing, and knowing that they've been doing it for centuries, which is just so disturbing to think of all the victims that they've had. And they don't discriminate when it comes to those victims. So that really freaked me out. And I guess in a weird way kind of pulled me into the story, because as much as I hated them, I was just really just waiting for them to get that justice that they had coming. So but yeah, I don't think it kind of totally flipped it on its head from what I expected, especially since I hadn't read that to that point in the book with the baseball boy. It really hammered home in some disturbing ways.
I want to go to the movies with you more often. When you fist pumping, swearing when things are happening, like it's so quiet when I go see a movie. I mean, I'm just more quiet, but I feel like I need more of that in my life. So there was only I guess I had a little more courage to do that because it was me and two other people in the theater. And I was sitting behind those people, so I could kind of do it without causing a scene. I think that's harder to do, though, because like usually when you got like the group mentality, like when you all see like a Star Wars movie or like Endgame, and there's like 300 people there and everyone's clapping, it makes it a little more acceptable. But no, here you are, one of three people fist pumping and swearing. Like there's 300 people in the theater.
Well, I will say for me, the worst part of this movie was the people in the row with me while watching this movie. It was,
oh no,
it was bad. Like I had two people, and it was one of those assigned seating with like the recliners and everything. So like I'm in my assigned spot, and of course like it's empty for a little while, and then two people come and sit right next to me and start talking and don't really stop until the end of the movie. And then we have a whole group of people to the left of me that are also kind of talking, and there's all kinds of like food crinkling and stuff going on over there. So the fact that I was able to enjoy this movie with all that going around me, I think is a testament to how much I really like this movie.
Mine was pretty bad. I had people talking through maybe the first 30 minutes, and we all had to just tell them to shut up. Yeah, it's. I don't want to get on my soapbox. I want to think about happier things.
Some of the things that the people next to me were talking about were just like when they're going to the Overlook, they're like, "That's the hotel from The Shining." No kidding. Welcome to the sequel to The Shining. Yes, that is the hotel from The Shining.
Just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah, and seeing it alone, like you, Brian, I saw it by myself, and I kind of like was half looking around. Like it's a dark, snowy night when I leave the theater. It's like, is the true not waiting for me? Plus, this theater is a very kind of an older theater, and the carpet patterns are very Shining-esque. So that kind of added to my atmosphere as well. So it kind of made me feel a little bit like I need like a tricycle to ride around there. That'd be a good promotion.
I mean, and I do have to say, because we were talking about like seeing the hotel. I had mentioned this a little bit before. I was very fortunate to have been able to go on the set of Dr. Sleep around this time last year, I think. And when I was on set, it wasn't known, because there was no trailer, that they were going to direct sequelize this to The Shining. In fact, a lot of people had just assumed that Mike Flanagan was just going to adapt the book and kind of just sidestep all that. I know you guys haven't read the book, but there is no Overlook Hotel in Dr. Sleep because it blew up in The Shining. So
imagine that.
Yeah, but it's alive and standing in in the Kubrick film. So yeah. So anyway, so we, we're walking around, and Mike Flanagan is as giddy as a boy on Christmas. And he's like, I got to show you guys something. And then we got the approval for it. And so we're walking around these smaller sets, and we got to see some things that were really cool. And we're going to another soundstage, and he's just like skipping with us. He's got this big grin on his face. And, I'm like, I don't know exactly what we're gonna see, but I walk, and then I see the guy that played Grady, and I'm like, okay. And they walk us into the Colorado room, which is that big main room. And a lot of people don't or may not know, because when they had Ready Player One, a lot of people talked about that great Shining scene. Well, that was CG recreated. For this, they painstakingly rebuilt it piece by piece. And so they rebuilt everything. So it's like you're walking right into the 1980 movie. And yeah, so that was like I said, that was incredible. Not just as an experience, but to imagine and to see the love of Mike Flanagan, who went to the extra step of saying, hey, we're not just going to adapt this book. We want to tie it in. We want to make it something bigger. And like I said, and recreated the hotel from the inside out so that it follows, like I said, in a lot of cases, the original blueprints. And so I think what he really did, I mean, I wasn't like one of those theater goers who was very loud and saying, oh my God, the hotel. But even after I said the surprise of being on the set visit, seeing the trailer, knowing what was going to happen, I was amazed from start to finish about how faithfully he was able to kind of recreate some of those Kubrick elements without it feeling like a reboot or like a cheesy sequel. I think it was very seamless. At least that's how it felt to me.
I also appreciate that he didn't go with any kind of CGI or digital effects to bring back previous characters. Particularly, and we're getting deep into spoiler territory here, but my favorite scene of this whole movie is when Dan confronts kind of the specter of his father in the barroom scene, because I think that just kind of culminates everything about Dan's story arc that just comes to such a satisfying conclusion. And I'm very glad they didn't try and digitally stick Jack Nicholson's face on Jack Torrance's head, whoever was playing him, which, by the way, weird piece of trivia. Anybody here know who played Jack Torrance in this movie?
No.
Oh, not offhand.
Henry Thomas, aka Elliot from E.T.
Oh, right. For some reason, I was thinking Dan. Okay, yeah.
I had no idea until I was just kind of like looking through the cast list on IMDb tonight, just kind of prepping. And I was like, wait, Henry Thomas, I know that name. And yeah, Elliot. And I guess, has he been in other Flanagan stuff?
Yes. The Haunting of Hill House, and also other projects of his as well. Like, I think he was in the Ouija movie that Flanagan did. So they worked together.
Origin of Evil. Yeah.
Yes. So he's a Flanagan frequenter.
So I was glad to not have to like see this weird uncanny valley Jack Nicholson standing at the bar. And
right.
That scene also represents to me why the whole Overlook element works for me in ways that it didn't seem to for other people. Some of the input I heard was that like the whole Overlook scene was kind of like fan service and how like a lot of movie series, like I think they name dropped like Jurassic World, how by the time Jurassic World rolls around, like, oh, the Raptors are the good guys now. Similar to how he's kind of using the house as kind of like an anti-hero. But for me, it didn't like it. I didn't really digest it that way. It was more, if we're going to that idea of, why Dan is going through substance abuse problems in the first place, it's the trauma of dealing with this hotel. So he's able to kind of work his deal out with the substance abuse, but this is kind of his opportunity to really work out the trauma too. So that's what that whole scene for me read as when he's talking to his dad at the bar, or at least like kind of what's left of his dad's spirit at the bar. He's being offered a drink. Jack keeps offering him a drink, and like I never once thought he was actually going to take it. This was just his opportunity to kind of like work some stuff out with his dad, or as close to he was able to going to be able to come to doing that. So for me, it was a very heartfelt scene, and it's part of what makes the whole Overlook kind of act work for me, where it might not have worked for other people.
Yeah, it's a very cathartic scene, and yeah, I think it works too.
Now, that being said, I do think they might have leaned a little heavy into some of the Shining references. But
hey, the gang's all here, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it was
that also serves a purpose too.
Yeah,
with facing Rose the Hat, you kind of need those people. I mean, we didn't get the bear person, but we got pretty much most everyone else.
Thank goodness. Oh God, that would be so awkward.
He was not in one of the locked boxes, apparently.
Well, they seem to be more voyeurs, so I don't think they really, or exhibitionists, so I don't think they'd want to be trapped in a box while they were doing that.
Very true. Yeah, that is. We're doing a deep analyzation of all the characters, but yeah, I think, and it's when that's amazing that Henry Thomas plays him, because he totally embodies that kind of era of Jack Nicholson. Like they really nailed the look of him, and it didn't take me out of it having someone else play him, since he did such a great job, and he called Danny like pup, and he referred to the whiskey as medicine, so it kind of tied in with a lot of stuff from the original film. But I think it worked. I think it definitely is justifiable, and the True Knot kind of gets Rose the Hat, kind of is that driving force to get them there. So I kind of like how in this version the Overlook is not blown up, and that they can have this final showdown there, and just the freakiness of it too, and how like I was kind of expecting the whole movie for those boxes to come into play at some point, and for all the characters to show up. And even Danny alludes to that they need help from the Overlook to defeat Rose the Hat. But I was like really blown away by the makeup effects work. I know Robert Kurtzman worked on this, and just like the whole hands kind of melding into the face in the Rose the Hat scene, it just reminded me of that one kill scene in John Carpenter's The Thing, where that's
what I was thinking too.
Right? Yes. Okay. They go right in the cheeks. I'm like, this is great. This is like way more gooey than I expected. So yeah, I really enjoyed that too. But like you said, Tamika, too, you could almost have that be its own movie, because it's like kind of two movies coming together, but in a way it still worked for me. But I totally see how it's kind of like these two separate stories, and then the third act is all about like those stories colliding and the freakiness going on.
Yes, exactly. I agree with Bryan about the importance of having Danny and Jack talk and interact, because it's important to kind of face the thing that either you're afraid of or is the cause of your issues, and Jack is one of the causes of Danny's issues in the hotel. And so they need to there needs to be some sort of discussion or, some button on whatever is going on in Danny's mind, so that he can heal and try to move forward in a positive way. And I can totally relate to this moment because there's so many instances in my life where I had to face a person or something that was the cause of a lot of negativity in my life or negative habits or whatever the case may be. And I don't know, in a way, it was kind of me reliving those moments again in watching this play out in the film. Not to get super deep because I felt it coming. And then I reeled her back. So I promise I will spare you all my issues. But no, it didn't feel fan servicey at all. And I think that's one of the things that I really, really enjoyed about this movie. And I really wanted to see more of that, more of, more characters that were interesting and redeeming and just like I enjoy the character study. Like I just really wanted more of that and not the true not stuff so much. And the more I talk about it, the more it just makes me not like this movie. And I don't want that because it's not a bad movie at all. It's not a bad movie. It just did not work for me. It just didn't.
You know how much I love vampire movies. Anytime you have, basically hippie roaming vampires that vape the souls of children. Like,
oh my gosh, I didn't think of that.
I'm a pretty easy mark for that. But I do want to say, I think one of my favorite scenes, and I talked a little bit about this before, is that I feel like Dr. Sleep is hypnotic in different ways. While still being hypnotic. And I think one of the scenes that kind of really illustrates that is when Rose the Hat astral projects and starts going after Abra. And there is similar to Kubrick, but in a different way, there is he's not in a rush to get there. Whereas maybe other directors, or if he had more of a restriction in place, I can imagine her just projecting right into that room. But it's the way the camera follows her and the way it's dreamlike as she's, as she's making her way there. She takes her time. Mike Flanagan takes his time as the camera kind of rotates as she gets into the room. There's just something about that scene, and then, and also her interactions with Abra in reverse, when Abra is kind of projecting out towards them, that I feel really work for me, and that I feel, like I said, are interestingly hypnotic, and which also kind of calls out that, I also think similarly, this is a movie that requires revisits. There is not enough. There is an overload of content where you can't catch everything, between some of the other Stephen King references that are there that we heard called out online. We know, and maybe somebody saw it. I didn't catch it. If you saw it, let me know. But the Oculus mirror is in there. Flanagan always puts it in his stuff. So the Oculus, his idea back in the day was that Oculus was a transportable Overlook Hotel, and so of course he had to put the Oculus mirror.
Okay. So that I need to pipe in here because this movie did so many things in terms of making stuff better, and one of the things that actually somehow did was, I think I'm one of 3 people in the world who didn't like Oculus because I couldn't get over the fact that I'm just like, guys, it's a freaking mirror. Why are we having this conversation? They didn't even break it at the end. Like, you get no payoff from this movie. And so, but like watching this movie, and when they talk about how, like, with The Shining and kind of Steam and what all this means, there are people who give that off and have that aura, but there are also places who can be either imbued or, in the case of the Overlook, infected by it. So and it didn't bother me that this, otherwise inanimate object was somewhat sentient now. And so like it kind of made me, because this is a Mike Flanagan movie, it's making me look back on Oculus and saying that, maybe I was a little too hard on it for my initial interpretation of really being aggravated by that mirror.
I think similarly, I didn't enjoy Oculus a lot on the first viewing, and it's something that I've grown to appreciate. I like quite a bit now, as either my tastes have changed, or I've given it a little more time, or I've become more familiar with Mike Flanagan, whatever the case may be. I definitely suggest revisiting.
And also Oculus, very similar themes to both The Haunting of Hill House and Dr. Sleep, about kind of your parent becoming the villain or someone that you can't trust, or the crumbling of the family. And he's really there's going to be a college course on Flanagan one of these days because all of his movies have these shared themes, and it never really feels repetitive because he finds new ways to approach these themes. And I 100% agree on the astral projection scene. I thought it was super hypnotic and very soothing and calming and cosmic in a lot of ways. But for the life of me, the whole time, I could not stop thinking about the Chris Farley scene from Beverly Hills Ninja. Whenever he astral projects in that movie, he is sent flying back to his body, and just like Rose the Hat, goes flying out like through a wall. So when I was waiting for that to happen, and when Rose the Hat was flung off of the RV, I was almost laughing out loud because all I could think of was Chris Farley in Beverly Hills Ninja, like flying through the air, like, oh my goodness, it was just so great. Like I could not get that out of my head. So I loved that, and it's just a weird connection, but I could not stop thinking of that.
Derek, I'm pretty sure that was in my subconscious, because now you bring that up, it's like, yes, that those two things just like absolutely connected. And I think the only reason it didn't like come to the front of my mind was because I was too busy wondering, like, okay, is Rose the Hat's hand gonna be as messed up as it was when she was astral projecting? So when they showed it, it's like, oh God, yes, very much so.
Yeah, it had a little more consequences than Beverly Hills Ninja. It was a little more dark, but I love the kind of like the dream sequence stuff, and I like how, I think, like you said, Jonathan, the showdown between Abra and Rose the Hat is, to me, probably is the most compelling part of the story, and I love the build up to their showdown and how Rose the Hat thinks that she can manipulate this girl, and she's so overconfident, and to see her not only meet her match, but meet someone who is far more powerful than her, because there's that conversation that she has with Crow Daddy where he's like, well, shouldn't we, if she's like really this powerful, shouldn't we try and convert her? And she's like, no, we don't want that kind of power in the group. And really that's more her saying, I don't want this power in the group because I won't be the at the head of the pack anymore. Like she knows that she's out. She kind of knows she's outmatched, and to see her go up against someone like that, who is a lot less experienced than her. So that kind of levels the playing field. But I just love that whole dynamic. And then Danny's kind of in the middle of that. And he's like the new Dick Halloran, which I thought was really fascinating. This theme of responsibility, like when Dick tells him, I didn't, because he's like, Danny tells Dick, I didn't ask for this. And I thought one of the greatest lines in the movie is Dick basically saying, well, I didn't ask for this either. You just walked into my kitchen one day. And then you're like, oh my gosh, like it's not just Danny's story. It's like all these different things. And it kind of makes you think of like how Dick didn't really ask to be a part of any of this narrative, and he just got pulled into it. And now Danny becomes the mentor that Dick was for him. So I thought that was really cool how they kind of passed the torch in that way.
And I think that's an important part of the movie, in that this isn't like, ultimately, I don't think it's Danny's story. It's Abra's story, and which is good, because I think Kyliegh Curran is absolutely amazing in it. I hope she starts to pick up some other roles. just kind of watching the poise that she has to keep during this movie. And again, going back to that astral projection scene, like, you know, Rose the Hat, you know, like you said, Derek, she thinks she has kind of one up on this, you know, weak little teen girl. And then it turns out she had walked into the lion's den. And so watching that flip flop and just watching the fear in Rose the Hat's eyes, and that, I don't know if menace is the right word, but just like, she's Abra's not scared. And that very much comes through kind of with almost a little bit of like, teenage recklessness. Like someone like Danny probably wouldn't have been either, I don't know, in some ways brave and in other ways kind of reckless and stupid to just start like seeing what she can dig around in Rose the Hat's, you know, mind. Danny probably would have just found a way to like get the hell out of there as quickly as possible, but Abra was willing to stand up to her. So that was part of that whole astral projection scene was really amazing, mainly due to Kyliegh Curran's performance there.
Yeah, she really does steal the show. And it was refreshing, too, to see someone that's not really scared and is kind of just as confident in her own right to take on this villain that Danny's kind of like. Danny's the one that's saying, you know, maybe we should just kind of go our own ways. And she's like, no, we can't let this evil exist in the world. Even despite the fact, even before they target her, she's like, when they're torturing the baseball boy and she's like, this is not right. We need to do something about this. And it was the perfect matchup. And then even when Danny is projecting through her, it's like she played that so well in that scene with Crow Daddy, where she's playing, like, you can see that it's like Danny through her acting, and she's taking all these different like facets of her performance to these levels that are with these veteran actors. It's amazing that she was able to not only hold her own, but like kind of steal the show in a lot of ways. And the only thing I wish is, and this is another kind of Derek thing, like Beverly Hills Ninja, but at the end of the movie, like I mentioned, I love the passing the torch thing, and I think it really ends on a touching note with that. But at the end of the movie, there's a song by Van Halen called "Humans Being" that was on the soundtrack of Twister, and in the bridge of the song, if you know the song, you might know what I'm getting at. But we hear Danny tell. We hear Danny tell Avra to shine on. And in the bridge of Humans Being, Sammy Hagar, because he was still with the band at this point, he sings "Shine On, Shine On." Derek,
I'm going to stop you right here. In a world where Pink Floyd's "Shine On, You Crazy Diamonds" exists, your go-to in that situation was an obscure Van, what I'm guessing is either Van Hagar or even like the third round with like Gary Sharon. That's where your mind went when they started talking about "Shine On."
Well, it's like one of the last songs I did with Sammy Hagar, so I have a special place in my heart for that song. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's probably historically better options, but that's the one, that I said it's a Derek thing. So take it.
This is what makes you.
But I think wouldn't that have been great playing that over the credits, like this gnarly, like down and dirty '90s rock song, like after this elegant kind of Overlook Hotel experience, and they just play that, and all because the word "shine on" are in the song for like 10 seconds.
Derek, 100% sincerity, never change. I love you so much.
Yes.
The Derek cut.
I agree. Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Sleep as we start to wrap things up. I want to talk about Dr. Sleep and the box office. And I don't like to focus too much on it in terms of, I think there's a lot of focus, like when people were pushing Endgame to be the number one, the top box office hit. Like, I don't care about that kind of thing, especially because it doesn't even factor things like inflation. The reason why I care about box office is because if a movie does well, that means that my favorite filmmakers and actors, actresses, creators, whatever, get to keep doing what they're going to do. I do think that it's unfortunate that Dr. Sleep hasn't been doing that well. As of right now, it's made about $36 million worldwide. It costs around $40 million to make, I believe, was the reported budget, but that doesn't factor things in like marketing. So then that number is quite inflated. And so I'm curious what everybody's take is. I have some thoughts as well. Why do you think that this movie didn't gel with people? Or why do you think that people didn't go out to see it? Tamika, well, we'll start with you.
Well, I did hear that it might take a $20 million hit. So that's just, that's so unfortunate. I've tried to come up with reasons why maybe people didn't come out the way that it was initially projected. I think it might be two things. One, I don't think that there are nearly as many fans of The Shining, perhaps, as they were hoping. Like they were hoping, okay, this movie is so highly regarded, especially amongst, filmies like ourselves. And so maybe they'll come out to see the sequel. And maybe there aren't as many fans as they hoped. Because I can't imagine there are younger people that were, that seeing this Shining or have any interest in that. So they don't have a connection to the book or the film. So then that doesn't get them to want to maybe see this movie. And then my second thought was maybe it's because the film is called Dr. Sleep. And I think that's why a lot of films like try to, the Star Wars saga, the Twilight saga, like they try to remind you like, this is that, and connect, the two things. And since this is called Dr. Sleep, because obviously it's based on the book and it's not like the shinier, the shiniest,
right.
The Shining part
still
2.
shining 2.
It's still shining. Yeah, it's still shining.
On. Yes, there we go.
Shine on. Shine on. No, the Shining dash shine on : Dr. Sleep.
As many colons and dashes as you can get in a title.
Exactly. And I think maybe that confused people and they thought, well, what is Dr. Sleep? And then they thought, next, I'll wait for that to go on streaming. Maybe.
I really agree with that, because I think there was definitely a lot of cool marketing done for the film. And I think that I like how, the trailer didn't give too much away. But I almost feel like it didn't lean into the Shining name as much as it could have, because just talking to more, not really horror fans, but like casual moviegoers, some people didn't really know what Dr. Sleep was. And I had, and you say, well, it's kind of like the sequel to The Shining. And they're like, oh, interesting. Because like, I don't think that point got across as much as it could. And even with Stephen King's name on it, when people think The Shining, they think of the Jack Nicholson, Stanley Kubrick Shining. And if you're not connecting to that as much as possible, I think it's not going to get people in the seats like you would hope. I feel like if it had just had, and to your point too, Tamika, like talking about the true knot and how it kind of maybe took you out of the story. I think with the marketing for it, a lot of it is about the true knot and this story that is really outside of the Overlook Hotel. And if it had been more about the Overlook Hotel, and if that had been front and center through all of the advertising and just getting the word out about the film, I think you would get a lot more people in there. If this was, if it was The Shining 2, as ridiculous as that sounds, I think it would have at least more brand awareness where you're like, oh, okay, that's what that is, because not everyone is aware of what Dr. Sleep means and what that means in the Shining universe. And you also have this complex thing where it's like it's a sequel to both the book and the movie, but you're also kind of recreating scenes with different actors. And I know Jack Nicholson is essentially retired from acting. But if somehow you had been able to get him involved, I think that also would be this bridging the gap between the two movies and getting more people to be like, wow, this is like more must watch movie going experience. But it also, I think, I like what they did. I love the movie, but I think it was a little more difficult to kind of put your finger on what is this movie just to the casual moviegoer.
Yeah, I think just overall, this movie is a tough sell in terms of marketing to any kind of a wide audience. And I think the way they marketed it shows that, because most of what I saw was, like Jonathan, you getting to do the on location visit. I know there were a few different rounds of that they did with a few different outlets. And Jonathan, when you were there, was it kind of other horror outlets that were there for the most part, or were there any like mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it was horror focused.
Yeah. So I think they, I get the sense that they kind of knew that this was going to be a tough sell for a wide market. And so they did the best they could to try and like really just beef up the horror interest in it. But I think even among the horror community, it's a tough sell because it's, like we've been saying, it's a sequel. It's a quasi sequel in a lot of different ways, in terms of it's kind of a sequel to the book, but it's also kind of a sequel to the movie. And if you're looking at it as a sequel to the movie, I'm sure there are a lot of horror fans out there who, if they really love The Shining, that's not a movie that really begs for a sequel. And so, if you then try and argue as someone like me who has seen it that like, well, it's a sequel, but it's like, it's also a completely different thing, then that could also turn people off. And I just think it was kind of one of those things where it just kind of like all the little nuances or the little elements of this just chipped away at people who might potentially be interested. And so it just kind of got down to that, I guess, however many people made up $14.1 million to check it out.
I'm always, it's interesting, and I try to say this as often as I can on Corpse Club, and if I ever do panels or when I talk to people about the horror community, because I think we feel like the horror community that horror fans, I should say, it's a smaller group than it is. It's a huge group. But that huge group doesn't know all of the movies. You might like horror, but it doesn't mean that you know all the directors and you've seen you've seen movies that even go back 10 or 20 years or more. And I think a good example of this is like just recently, within the last week or two, I met up with a group of people. We were doing some icebreakers just to kind of get to know each other, and a guy was talking about how he loves horror movies and that. Midsummer is his favorite movie of the year. I'm like, awesome. Okay. So we'll talk about some horror movies. And he just says, so how'd you get into horror? And I said, my parents, when I was younger, they had me watch movies, with the Universal Monsters or Vincent Price. And he's like, who's Vincent Price? Ooh. But do you see, like, your immediate...
I'm only laughing not because it's like, what the hell's wrong with that guy, but because I have been that guy. Like, not with Vincent Price, but like, we have our niches, most people. I think we probably have a wider scope than a lot of people, just because, we have to write about it, so we need to kind of bone up in as much as we can. But even I have huge blind spots. Yeah. And so like I 100% get that, where I've been in conversations where it's like I've told someone how much I love horror movies, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, what about this, this, and this? And I've gone, shrug.
Be right back. I'm going to go watch these.
Yeah. Here's what I think happened, and then run away.
But I think, and this will be a soapbox moment. I think that's an opportunity for people who really like horror to bring more people in, introduce them to great things. So when he was like, he's like, who's Vincent Price? I didn't laugh. I didn't, I barely skipped a beat. And I'm like, oh, well, he's done these movies. And I started listing some of them. And as I was talking to him about movies, he was like, well, where do you recommend I start? And as I was giving him movies, he was writing them down. And so hopefully he'll be watching, some of the Vincent Price movies. Some Universal Monsters. Told him to start back at the Silence, check out Nosferatu, and and he's into that. So, but the point is that a lot of people are similar, where they're horror fans. They like the new stuff that comes out. They may have only seen the new Halloween. They may have only, seen the latest Blumhouse releases, and that is their conduit to horror. And they're horror fans, and they are. It's not, you're not a real horror fan if you don't watch this or that. I don't believe that at all. But what's problematic is that as more time passes, it's a numbers game. Less people are seeing The Shining. My sister's husband, he can't watch The Shining because it looks too old. It's too slow. And so just to kind of come full circle on this, Tamika, you kind of mentioned that, people hadn't watched it or didn't know what it is. And I think that's a lot of it. It's not just Gen Z, it's millennials as well. The amount of people who have seen The Shining is a lot smaller than Warner Brothers probably assumed. That said, they made a sequel to Blade Runner, which didn't do well when the original came out. And I was so happy that they made Blade Runner 2049. That lost some money too. That movie was 2 hours and 40 minutes plus. And so I guess, long story short, this movie probably isn't going to do well in the box office right now. But based on the reaction that people have had to it, I think this movie's here to stay. I think this movie is going to continue to gain a following. And I think much like the original Shining, which was not universally loved when it first came out, that this movie will continue to find its audience, and people will be like, 10, 20 years from now, I can't believe that people slept on Dr. Sleep, no pun intended. And so, and the good news is, Tamika, you said, well, the report said, and I think I saw something like that this could lose 20 million, maybe, and it's theatrical run. But there's DVD, there's Blu-ray, there's VOD, there's going to be the re-releases, there's going to be the director's cut. It will continue to come out. And my hope is that they celebrate this as much as they did The Shining. Warner Brothers is good about realizing that they have a good movie, even if it doesn't make a lot of money. Look what they did with Blade Runner. And so I think this will continue to find its audience. I don't think that this, the fact that it wasn't a box office hit is going to hurt Mike Flanagan at all. He is one of the best horror filmmakers working today. And I would go as far as say of all time. He's one of the greats already. And so if he makes a movie that's a smaller budget, or he gets a movie of equal or bigger budget, I don't think it matters. I'm just going to follow him around. I'm excited to see what he does. And I think that's the same case for everybody. So I don't think this movie, for sure, this movie is not a career killer. And I'm excited that we've had a chance to talk about it. Before we wrapped up, I did want to make one note for our listeners and just say, and I purposely didn't spoil it, and for our co-hosts, read Dr. Sleep, the book, if you want to know a little bit more about the characters, about the True Knot, and if you want to see an alternate take on the material, much like Kubrick's Shining versus Stephen King's book. There are some pretty big differences, specifically when it comes to the ending, but all kinds of other stuff. So I would say if you enjoy this world, if you want more of it, I don't think we're going to get a True Knot TV series that I really want. But you can read more about them and see how Stephen King envisioned them originally, and make sure to pick that up. So with that, our latest episode of Corpse Club comes to an end. I want to thank all my co-hosts. It's always a pleasure chatting with you whenever we can get together. And Scott, if you're listening, I hope you feel better, and we'll bring you in next time. Also want to thank Bryan, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode. And we especially want to thank our Corpse Club listeners, including those of you who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. Make sure to visit corpseclub.com. You can check out our latest episode, our back catalog, and you can sign up to become a Corpse Club member. We have options that include getting a membership card, a pin, a t-shirt. You can pick an episode topic. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Every single rating and review helps, so thank you to everyone who has rated and reviewed us. You can also find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, and all of your favorite podcast providers. We're now on YouTube. We should be on Pandora shortly, so Pandora listeners, hello. And if you want to get in touch, you can reach out anytime at contact@corpseclub.com. On Twitter, we're at Daily Dead News, and we're at Corpse Club, and we're on Instagram and Facebook under Corpse Club as well. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay scary.